Despite me being a primarily horror YouTuber, I'm no stranger to videos concerning survival, whether it be the Backrooms, Analog Horror, or even Five Nights at Freddy's. The thing is, these are all fictional topics covering popular horror media. However, in this case, this video would unfortunately become far too real. This is me, a YouTuber who has never vlogged before, in the middle of nowhere, hundreds of miles away from home in one of the most scarcely populated states, as well as the hottest, most deadly desert in North America. It is safe to say that this video didn't quite go as planned. What started out as an exploration to an abandoned mine ended in a complete nightmare and one of the most insane scenarios in my whole career. Welcome, I'm Mr. Mirage, and this is how I logically survived a Tier 5 desert. I'm sure by now you're wondering, how did I get here? And to explain that, we need to go back to early 2024, around February or March, when I would come to be hitting 10,000 subscribers. And I wanted to do something special in order to celebrate. But since it got delayed, it's more of going to be closer to a 50,000 subscriber special. But regardless, I wanted to make this video as a sort of thanks to you guys for all the support you showed me on this channel. It's insane. My problem was, I had no idea what I was going to do, and how I would turn it into a good video. I've always been a fan of exploration, so all I needed was a location, and it would come in the form of one of my favorite horror games. One that everything from the sound design to the disturbing entities was just perfection. People who have watched me for a while may have noticed I frequently use the soundtrack in my videos, as well as using the background footage for a few of my How to Logically Survive videos. This game is none other than Lost in Vivo. Now, Lost in Vivo, for those unfamiliar, is essentially a horror game where you chase after your missing dog through a sewer system, and eventually you run into way more than what you would expect. As you play through the game, you run through sewer systems, subway stations, trains, and eventually a mine. Now, as fun as it would have been to explore a giant sewer system, I had no clue how to find that sort of thing, nor the legality of it, or how safe it would be, or how far away it would be from my location, and if I could afford to go there. So I was left with the idea of a mine, which coincidentally, after a little bit of researching the game's soundtracks, I discovered was named after the Horton Mine. The Horton Mine, for those unfamiliar, is an abandoned mine shaft located in a small range of mountains in the middle of the state of Nevada. One that, oddly enough, is a small patch of green surrounded by hundreds of miles of desert. So the question is, what made this mine so special? For me, it was the words of a YouTuber going by the name Exploring Abandoned Mines, who claimed to hear voices over the PA system as well as random movements of the chains hanging from the ceiling. This was more than a little bit suspicious, and I wanted to figure out for myself if this mine was actually abandoned. I have been inside over 100 abandoned mines, but this one was definitely the creepiest. As I ventured hesitantly down the tunnel, it felt more and more wrong. So to me, I couldn't think of a better place to explore for my subscriber special. So after planning a day, recruiting one of my good friends to come with me, and packing a ton of camping equipment, we set off towards the mine. Little did we know this trip would not be one we would soon forget. In order to get up to the Horton Mine, we would need to drive through multiple intensely hot deserts, including Nevada's Great Basin and the Mojave Desert, which, for those unaware, the Mojave Desert is the hottest desert in North America, as well as being home to Death Valley, whose extreme conditions can easily make it a death wish, especially in the summer months, which was conveniently when we decided to go. I could tell immediately this trip was going to be fucking hell. From the days frequently passing 100 degrees to the winds blowing on us feeling like a hot AC, not to mention, if we did make it to the mine, there's always the possibility of it collapsing on us. Events like the Nutty Putty Cave incident and many others always sort of lingered in the back of our minds, but in the end, it wouldn't matter. But in order to take the minds off the hell we're about to have to go through, we'd first visit a bizarre fake grocery store in Las Vegas to see if we could find any cool supplies there.
About a no clip into the fucking
And to be honest, not to my surprise, all we found was a bunch of distorted, odd knickknacks and a secret passageway leading into the craziest drug tip of an experience. Overall, this place kind of gave me the vibes of LSD Dream Emulator and other liminal games, which for me was extremely fun. If you're familiar, I love that kind of thing. Now, And while it didn't really make us any progress, it did serve as a sort of cool resting spot before we went into the desert. So after a good night's sleep that night, we pushed forward to the entrance of the Horton Mine. But unfortunately, it wouldn't be long before my inexperience in vlogging would rear its ugly head, and it would come to cost us our entire trip. Promptly after reaching the entrance, I decided to do a pre-mine drone sweep, and due to my stupidity, my drone's autopilot would crash into the side of the mountain. This overall made it very clear that this might not have been a good idea. Now, a frequent theme you're going to notice over and over again in this video is I don't know how to vlog. This was my first time attempting a sort of vlogging style video because I'm used to just making these highly edited content. So when it came to vlogging, I had no clue what I was doing, and between wind interference and it now costing me my equipment, it became clear to me just how unprepared I was. But regardless, it was too late. It had already crashed. So to me, I knew exactly what I had to do. So since there was no way in hell I was leaving my drone up there, I needed to find the safest possible way to get up and down with my drone. For this, I wanted to keep a few things in mind. Firstly, the ground here was extremely unstable, especially on the left side, which meant the only viable option was climbing up the trees on the right side of the entrance to have some sort of grip. However, this comes with the risk of falling into the mine's entrance since I'm climbing right over it, and if that happened, I likely wouldn't survive. So it's safe to say, while I was doing this is probably one of the most scared I've ever been in my whole life. But after roughly around 30 to 45 minutes of me looking around up there, I managed to find my drone crashed upside down by some rocks, and luckily make it down safe. But afterwards, me and my friend were both just completely done with this situation due to how close I had come to being seriously injured and how close I came to losing my drone. We were just both completely done and ready to get the fuck out of there. Not to mention we were running low on water and it was getting darker by the minute. We ended up being forced to make the difficult decision that we were out of our league and that we'd scrap the video and get the hell out of there. However, this was a choice we had come to make too late, because now, despite everything, we had hundreds of miles of desert between us and home, and not much for a major city to take refuge in. We were going to have to camp nearby, at least for the night. So in the rest of this video, we're going to be going over what we dealt with and the logical methods we used to survive. A desert is defined as a landscape where little participation occurs, and consequently, living conditions create unique biomes and ecosystems. Now, one of the biggest threats that you wouldn't normally expect when coming to a desert, especially dunes, is that other than the extreme heat, you also have to frequently deal with very, very strong winds, which get faster the later in the day it becomes. Which brings me to introduce the tier system mentioned in the title. For those unfamiliar, things as hurricanes and earthquakes can be marked on the Richter scale and the severity index respectively. But harsh environments like this do not seem to possess the same ranking system, at least not that I know of. In my opinion, if there were to be such thing, deserts themselves should be tiered off of their average heat, average rain, top wind speeds, along with proximities to major cities. And when it comes to my current situation, two major deserts along with the hottest place on the planet stand between me and my destination: California's Mojave Desert and Nevada's Great Basin. The Mojave is not only the hottest desert in North America, but Death Valley has been seen to hit record temperatures of 134 degrees Fahrenheit. But the Mojave Desert, specifically in June, or the month that we happen to be there in, frequents 0 days of rain along with above 100-degree temperatures, easily making it a Tier 5 desert, with winds easily able to reach 40 miles an hour and especially worsening at night. Not to mention the fact that Nevada isn't really the state that's known for its population density, so we decided we were going to take our chances camping rather than try our luck in some random small town scattered across the state. Lucky for us, finding a decent spot to camp was easy, as nearly 90% of the state is uninhabited desert, albeit not the best place for camping in the summer, but not like we had much of a choice. So say you find yourself like us. Now logically, what would the best game plan be? There are three key things that you need to think over when surviving in this environment: your remaining strength, your body temperature, and your stamina. So we're going to keep track of ours for reference. Now, the key way for surviving in a place like this is focusing on shielding yourself from the elements, mostly finding shade and finding a way to block the searing wind, along with, of course, any sort of animal or creature that you're going to run into out here. Lucky for us, we had at least came prepared with a basic tent to sleep in for the night. The biggest problem was setting it up in a way that wouldn't blow away with the wind. It was already bad, but overnight it was only going to get worse. For this, we were able to use my car as a temporary advantage, finding the direction of the oncoming wind and parking it as a makeshift windshield. This wouldn't be enough for the whole night, but it would suffice in buying us time to get the tent built. Now, the problem with this, however, is when building a tent and putting effort into something like this, you start to become susceptible to heat exhaustion and worse, heat stroke. This can happen regardless of any amount of shade or water that you have, especially when you're working in over 100-degree heat, and you'll find yourself getting tired out way faster. These two ailments can cause you to become dehydrated, fatigued, dizzy, and in extreme cases, confusion, cramps, and even becoming unconscious. And I shouldn't have to tell you why passing out is a death wish out here. It was key that we set up our tent before any of these symptoms happened, and while using your car is always an option, gas is crucial in securing a way out of the desert the following day. And when you're miles away from the nearest gas station, it's not very smart to be running the AC all night long. So without this, the car would quickly succumb to the greenhouse effect, and the trapped heat would make the car considerably hotter than the outside. So in this situation, our tent would be our only saving grace.
I decided to stop and take a little breather. It's crazy how far I've come already. You can't even see like my campsite anymore.
Lucky for me, I brought light colored clothing that, as I'm sure you're familiar with, reflects light and assists in keeping your body temperature down. But the wind problems were just beginning, and it wasn't long before we were both forced to lay down and drink water, waiting for the daytime heat to die down. Now, as the night grew closer, we began to wonder if the pikes that came with the tent would be enough to keep the tent from flying away or from collapsing on us. So we wanted a sort of form of insurance to assure that this would not happen. Not to mention, it was becoming clear that by the time night hit, we would be the only ones out there, limiting our availability for any sort of help. But this was kind of expected because it takes a special kind of dumbass to summer camp in the Mojave Desert. But I couldn't help but have a bad feeling about this area, especially because every once in a while, cars would randomly show up, drive past us, then disappear off into the dunes. So I wanted to check it out before it got dark. After a few drone scout runs, I would have to bring it back as there was so much sand blowing through the air, the rotors were becoming blocked by it, and I couldn't risk them locking up midair, because then the mountain I climbed earlier would be for nothing. What this would mean is I would need to look for signs of people, and specifically where those cars went, on foot, because I figured it's better now than those people coming up on us and causing trouble in the middle of the night. And honestly, I don't want to meet anyone else that's crazy enough to be camping out here in the middle of the summer. So I went on a sort of, as you would say, journey across the dunes, while my friend stayed back at camp and watched our stuff while he rested. But due to lack of proper sand blocking face scarves, I had to make do with using my shirt instead. Before I went on this trip, I had no clue just how necessary these would be. Dunes have a significantly stronger wind, causing hot sand to cut through the air, and this can be anywhere from a mild annoyance to a serious problem when trying to get from point A to point B, especially when climbing the top of this massive dune. Typically, when it comes to cultures that live in the desert, sand is blocked via thin scarves and desert goggles, neither of which I had brought. After making it to the highest vantage point so I could get a solid view, I could barely even look over the top without being blasted in the eyes with sand. Eventually, all the water that I had brought with me would run out and I'd be forced back to the campsite to get more.
Down from the mountain as it was getting dark. And the second it got dark, a crazy wind started, as you could probably tell. And we're trying to keep our tent from blowing away at the moment.
Despite being slightly cooler and eliminating the need for shade, nights in the desert are uniquely terrifying, and this became clear as not long after it got dark, the corner of our tent would rip off its hinges and be flying in the wind, making it painfully obvious that we would need to take more extreme measures to keep our tent in place. Our best solution consisted of first using a rope to wrap around all sides of the tent evenly and then pulling it tight and weighing it down with rocks. This made it so the tent had extra support and didn't collapse. Then we used heavy items on the inside, and now that it was night, we had the energy to move nearby rocks along the borders of the tent, and this was finally enough to keep it in place. But this all is going to depend on the durability of the shelter that you have. There are specifically wind-resistant tents that will make this a lot of an easier process, but a majority of the time you're going to need to employ these tactics. There's also the factor that when it comes to areas like the desert, it becomes more alive at night, meaning you have to be more aware for desert mice, and since they're prey, they're predators such as coyotes and rattlesnakes. But regardless, our shelter was finally stable, so we can now focus on getting food. And since we had no stove or cooking grill, we'd be forced to resort to a fire to heat it up, which wouldn't be so hard as the desert contains a lot of dry wood and branches. Little did we know we would be running headfirst into the same brick walls before. The wind was too strong, and any fire would be immediately put out before it could get big enough. Our solution to this would oddly enough be very similar to before. We would need something to block the wind so the fire could start and last long enough to cook our food. As for obvious reasons, warmth wasn't necessary, because the desert remains in high 80s even at night. Now this took us a while and even more strength and energy to move all the rocks, but finally after using dry desert shrubs and various wood left around, we would finally get the fire going. Only to find out we had no sticks to roast the hot dogs on. And as you could probably guess, we used rocks as a solution to this too.
So we fixed the tent wind problem, but we have a bigger problem of trying to roast hot dogs without any sort of metal stick. So what we did here is we're just gonna set the bucket and made ourselves a hot dog.
Now, hear me out. Throughout our lives, hopefully we are taught that this would be a bad idea due to dirt and bacteria that might be present on said rocks. But with some quick research, harmful bacteria dies at a temperature of 212 degrees Fahrenheit. A fire burns at over 2000 degrees, more than enough to clean the rocks completely of bacteria. So after letting the rocks sit in the fire for a few minutes along with washing the dirt and sand off with water, we were able to regain a lot of energy and we're now ready to sleep the night off. Also, just a side story, for anyone curious on what happened to those people who drove past us, they came back at around 2 a.m. and started lighting off fireworks. The foreshadowing was crazy. But as annoying as this was, I found it as a sort of justification for me scouting earlier. However, I must have done a bad job because I didn't see anyone else there. So them showing up, understandably, caught us both off guard. Now, unfortunately, I did not think to get any footage of this as it was pitch black, so believe what you will. So overall, the trick to surviving the desert when you are brutally unprepared is simply utilizing the environment around you, mostly rocks and dry brush. If you can tolerate the wind, you can get by with just a simple form of shade, even if it is just a simple blanket strung up on sticks or a boulder that you can sit under. Hydration is a necessity, and if we didn't have water, it would have been a completely different story. But using the tricks that we did here helped us manage to get home safely the following day. Now, I know this video was kind of ridiculous, but I wanted to make something special for you guys for 50K, so I hope at least some of you guys enjoyed it. I'll be going back to horror videos right after this one. And for people who have never seen any of my videos before, I do a lot of videos with this similar style editing, mostly on horror content that you can check out on the rest of my channel. But past all that, I can't thank you guys enough for showing me all the support you have on this channel. Back when I started Mr. Mirage, I could have never dreamed that I would have even reached 10K, nonetheless 50K within a year. Like, that's been insane, and it truly means the world to me, and I plan to keep creating this quality horror content for you guys for as long as I possibly can. So if you're down to go on this journey with me, make sure to consider subscribing and join us on our way to the next sub milestone.
Well, that was quite an adventure. I'm sad to see you go, but don't worry, this doesn't have to be the last time we see each other. I got another cool video. Just for you. Hurry, the video's almost over.